The session is in order. Welcome all to the Model United Nations End of Semester Simulation. To begin this session, we will start with the roll. As your delegation is called, please respond with present and voting, or present, reserving your right to an abstention. The co-chair will now read the roll.
Afghanistan.
Present and voting.
Argentina.
Present and voting.
Germany.
Present and voting.
Ghana.
Present and voting.
India.
Present.
Saudi Arabia.
Present.
Sweden.
Present.
Turkey.
Present and voting.
Ukraine.
Present.
United States of America.
Present.
Thank you.
The roll has been called. The chair will now entertain a motion to set the topic of debate. India, you've been recognized.
India moves to set the debate to women in the armed force.
Thank you, India. Is there a second on the motion? Sweden seconds. The motion has been seconded and is on the table. Are there any other motions on the floor? Seeing that there are no other motions on the floor, we will now proceed to a vote. The co-chair will now read the motion on the table.
The motion on the table is as follows. Number 1, to set the debate topic to women in the armed forces.
All those in favor, please raise your placard. By unanimous consent, the motion passes. The topic of debate has been set to women in the armed forces. The chair will now entertain a motion to open the speakers list for 15 minutes with 1 minute and 30-second speaking times. Saudi Arabia, you've been recognized.
We would like to motion to open the speakers list for 15 minutes with a 1 minute and 30-second speaking limit.
Thank you, Saudi Arabia. Is there a second on the motion? Afghanistan seconds. The motion has been seconded and is on the table. We will now proceed to a vote. The co-chair will now read the motions on the table.
The motion on the table is as follows. Number 1, to open the speakers list for 15 minutes with 1 minute and 30-second speaking limits.
All those in favor, please raise your placard. Against? Abstentions? The vote is 9 in favor, 0 against, with 1 abstention. The motion passes. The speakers list is now open. All delegations that wish to be added to the speakers list, please raise your placards and be counted now. Afghanistan, you are first on the speakers list. You now have the floor for 1 minute and 30 seconds.
Thank you, Honorable Chair, fellow delegates, and members of the Assembly. The Islamic Republic of Afghanistan welcomes everyone today in opening statements with regards to gender equality. More specifically, women serving in the respective armed forces. Throughout its history, Afghanistan has been an involvement of contention from long-gone empires and modern superpowers alike. From Alexander the Great of Macedonia to Genghis Khan of Mongolia to the British empires of the late 19th century, Afghanistan has been mired in conflict and invasion. The Soviet-Afghan War of the 1980s brought about the Mujahideen in response and the emergence of Al-Qaeda and the Taliban in the 1990s. The more recent United States global war on terror and Operation Enduring Freedom has since overthrown the Taliban government in Kabul and combat the presence of Al-Qaeda. Yet there still remains a power vacuum in rural provinces. Since the introduction of the Afghan Constitution in 2004, the Islamic Republic has taken strides toward gender equality, especially with the enlistment and commissioning of female service members in the military, despite the outspoken opposition in a majority conservative population. Whereby traditionally dominated by men in all military occupational roles, the Afghan National Army looks forward to gaining higher recruitment rates and training of female service members to combat threats, foreign and domestic. Thank you. The delegation of Afghanistan yields the remainder of its time to the chair.
Thank you, Afghanistan. Argentina, you are now next on the speakers list. You have the floor.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. Fellow delegates, the Argentine Republic prides itself in being the most progressive Latin American country when it comes to gender equality. As of recent, the Argentine Armed Forces has had an increase of women participation in both combative and non-combative roles since 1997. Thus far, the Argentine Republic has supported women participation both socially and financially, which further encourages women to join the military. Argentina acknowledges that women play an increasingly important role in the army and hold many senior positions. Argentina admires those who choose to fight for our country and vow for equality within our military. Argentina moves forward towards rewriting outdated legislation that puts limits on women fighting in the military. Argentina upholds goal number 5 of the UN Sustainable Development Goals that strives to end all form of discrimination against all women and girls everywhere, and hopes the other delegations feel the same. Argentina yields the rest of the time to the chair.
Thank you, Argentina. Germany, you are now next on the speakers list. You have the floor for 1 minute and 30 seconds.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. We, the Federal Republic of Germany, believe having qualified women in the front lines empowers our vision of gender equality. And Germany yields the remainder of its time.
Thank you, Germany. At this time, the chair will entertain a motion for a moderated caucus of 6 minutes with 1 minute speaking limits on the topic of women on the front lines. Germany, you've been recognized.
Germany motions for a moderated caucus of 6 minutes with 1 minute speaking limit on the topic of women in the front lines.
Is there a second on the motion? United States seconds. The motion has been seconded and is on the table. Are there any other motions on the floor? Ghana, you've been recognized.
Ghana would like to motion for a moderated caucus of 6 minutes with 1 minute speaking times on the topic of expanding all female involvement in all occupations within the military, including combat.
Thank you, Ghana. Is there a second on the motion? Sweden seconds. The motion has been seconded and is on the table. Are there any other motions on the floor? Seeing as there are no other motions on the floor, we will now proceed to a vote. The co-chair will now read the motions on the table.
The motions on the table are as follows. Number 1, women on the front lines. Number 2, expanding female involvement in all occupations within the armed forces, including combat.
The first vote is on women on the front lines. All those in favor, please raise your placards. Against? Abstentions? The vote is 3 in favor and 5 against, with 2 abstentions. The motion does not pass. The second vote is on expanding female involvement in all occupations within the armed forces, including combat. All those in favor, please raise your placards. Against? Abstentions? The vote is 8 in favor, with 1 against and 1 abstention. The motion passes. We are now in a moderated caucus for 6 minutes with 1 minute speaking limits. Ghana, since the motion was yours, you now have the floor for 1 minute.
Thank you. Is the UN still relevant today? This has undeniably been the biggest question this institution has faced in recent years. Today's discussion and vote will answer that question. Our country has taken strides recently in the areas of women's rights and women's rights in the military and vowed to continue to do so. Major Emmanuel Sosu, second in command of our 4th Infantry Battalion, has stated, "Female empowerment is top on the agenda of the military with certain goals allotted for women to be enlisted and encouraged to rise through the ranks." The second example of our progress is a woman by the name of Constance Ama Amifa Ejeni Afeni. In 2017, she was appointed as the first female brigadier general in our country's history. It's stories like these that should inspire reasonable movement on the issue of women in the military. My country believes this institution can still be relevant today with effective action. We yield the rest of our time to the chair.
Thank you, Ghana. Are there any other delegations that wish to speak at this time? Ukraine, you've been recognized.
Thank you, Honorable Chair and fellow delegates. Ukraine is in full support and have increased the inclusion of women in our military, filling roles off and on combat, including nurses, IT, engineers, and soldiers on the combat field. With the presence and influence of women in the military, our armed forces would benefit, increasing in both number of individuals in the military and diversity. Stereotypes and violence towards women can decrease as negative thoughts and ideas towards women are destroyed. With the inclusion of women, gender equality can improve both in our military and our society. Thank you. Ukraine yields the remainder of the time back to the chair.
Thank you, Ukraine. Are there any other delegations that wish to speak at this time? Germany, you've been recognized.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. We, the Federal Republic of Germany, believe having qualified women in the front lines empowers our vision of gender equality. Our military is purely voluntary. When reaching the appropriate age of 18, these women fully understand the risk factors being in the front lines. Germany yields the remainder of its time to the chair.
Thank you, Germany. Are there any other delegations that wish to speak at this time? United States, you have the floor.
Thank you, Honorable Chair and fellow delegates. For the past few decades, the United States has worked to implement women in a number of positions, including combat roles throughout its military, as well as the recent finding of the men's-only draft to be unconstitutional. We believe that all men and women should serve in all positions equally. The United States yields the remainder of its time to the chair.
Thank you, United States. Are there any other delegations that wish to speak? Saudi Arabia, you've been recognized.
Thank you, Honorable Chair and fellow delegates. We, the delegation of Saudi Arabia, have taken an initiative in including women in the armed forces. We think the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, has just recently in 2018 started allowing women to join the armed forces and sees this as a huge step forward, bearing in mind how conservative and religious our country is. We take into consideration our conservative society. We would not be allowing women to take part in combative roles in our armed forces and will limit them for now to supportive and security roles. We believe that things don't change overnight and would like to take it one step at a time. People must understand and not criticize a country for their cultural and religious beliefs. We invite all Saudi women to serve their country and apply for the armed forces. Saudi Arabia would like to yield the remainder of the time to the chair.
Thank you, Saudi Arabia. Are there any other delegations that wish to speak at this time? Turkey, you've been recognized.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. While the Republic of Turkey does not share the same sentiments as most of the countries present pertaining to female inclusion in private life, we believe that women should be granted equal opportunity within our military. While we will not encourage women to join the military, they should be allowed to serve their fellow citizens as they see fit, which is why we will continue to work on expanding our training programs and available positions to include more women in the future. Turkey yields the remainder of the time to the chair.
Thank you, Turkey. The time for the moderated caucus has expired. We will now come back to the speakers list. Ghana, you now have the floor for 1 minute and 30 seconds.
Thank you. I appreciate my fellow UN members acknowledging the problem of women's rights and women's rights in the military, but their ideas are lackluster at best. As with any challenge in life, goals must be created and bars must be set. Without these key ingredients, feet will be dragged and true progress is delayed. This issue cannot afford to be put on the back burner. The opposition argues they're being forced to do something they do not wish to partake in. Let me be clear. Forcing or criticizing isn't the goal here today. Basic knowledge of the UN tells us that our job is to influence, promote, encourage, not force. But I must stress this. Those who fail to keep up with this ever-changing and progressing world will eventually fall behind. But don't be the country that chooses to fall behind. We yield the rest of our time to the chair.
Thank you, Ghana. Next up on the speakers list is India. You now have the floor for 1 minute and 30 seconds.
Thank you, Honorable Chair, fellow delegates. The Republic of India understands the importance of the incorporation of women in the workforce. When it comes to incorporating women in the military, the Indian Army is not yet ready to have women in combat roles. However, women are allowed to join select areas such as medical, legal, educational, and engineering wings of the Army. We currently have 3% of women in our armed forces performing supporting roles. Our Constitution allows women to choose the profession they desire. However, it is the responsibility of the government and the Army to look out for a safe environment where women will not be subjected to horrendous crimes if being captured by the enemy. We look forward to work with all delegations to accommodate women in the military at their own pace and respecting their cultural values. We hope to one day achieve gender equality in the armed forces. Thank you. We yield the rest of our time to the chair.
Thank you, India. Saudi Arabia, you're next on the speakers list. You now have the floor.
Thank you, Honorable Chair and fellow delegates. We, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, have over time understood the capability and potential that women can provide, which is why we started constructing numerous social reforms towards women around this time last year, like allowing them to enlist in our armed forces. Since our inclusion of women into the military has recently begun, our percentage rate of women in the military is fairly low compared to other delegates. We would like to proclaim that we should not govern other countries for a higher percentage, since it is their choice what percent they would like to be at. But we would like to ensure that our percent will gradually increase at our own pace due to our conflicting religious beliefs. Saudi Arabia would like to yield the rest of the time to the chair.
Thank you, Saudi Arabia. Sweden, you are next up on the speakers list. You now have the floor.
Thank you, Honorable Chair and fellow delegates. The Kingdom of Sweden had led the charge globally to give women equality in all aspects of a country's operations. In 2014, Sweden became one of the first countries to adopt a feminist foreign policy. To date, 79 nations have adopted national action plans to elevate the role of women in peace and security purposes. Since 2017, Sweden has given women equal opportunity as their male counterparts to serve and grow in the armed forces. Globally, Sweden has become a major donor to the United Nations Entity for Gender Equality, which promotes empowerment and women's rights worldwide. 536 million krona will be allocated to different educational programs with funds expiring in 2022. Sweden is also offering support by offering training opportunities at the Nordic Center for Gender and Military Operations. The focus of the center aims to include women to a much greater extent in the work for peace and security and take into consideration the perspective of both men and women. Sweden is and has been a strong advocate for increased implementation, understanding, education, and competence in the gender field in line with our feminist foreign policy and the UN Entity for Gender Equality. We yield the remainder of our time to the chair.
Thank you, Sweden. At this time, the chair will entertain a motion for a moderated caucus of 5 minutes with 1 minute speaking limits on the subject of gender requirements in the military. Saudi Arabia, you've been recognized.
Saudi Arabia would like to motion for a moderated caucus of 5 minutes with 1 minute speaking limits on the topic of setting a quota for the number of women in the military.
Is there a second on the motion? Sweden seconds. The motion has been seconded and is on the table. Are there any other motions on the floor? Seeing that there are no other motions on the floor, we will now proceed to a vote. The co-chair will now read the motion on the table.
The motion on the tables are as follows. Number 1, setting a quota for the number of women within the military.
All those in favor, please raise your placards. Against? Abstentions? The vote is 6 in favor, 3 against, with 1 abstention. The motion passes. We are now in a moderated caucus for 5 minutes with 1 minute speaking limits. Saudi Arabia, since the motion was yours, you now have the floor for 1 minute.
Thank you, Honorable Chair and fellow delegates. We would like to remind all delegations that Saudi Arabia, as well as every other country in here, is a sovereign nation and cannot be told how to manage their military. We, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, believe that every sovereign country is different and every country is subject to different percentages of women in the military. We don't believe that other countries should set quotas on how fast they think we should be progressing, especially countries with single-digit percentages like Ghana. No country but us knows how fast we should be progressing. We have already allowed women to sign up for the armed forces, and we cannot force them to join. We, Saudi Arabia, are gradually progressing and believe that it is best for our country to take things step by step. The Saudi Arabian people are strongly religious and need time to adjust to change. As they say, Rome was not built in one day, so to achieve greatness, you need to take things 1 step at a time. We would like to yield the remainder of the time to the chair.
Thank you, Saudi Arabia. Are there any other delegations that wish to speak at this time? India, you've been recognized.
The Republic of India rejects the implementation of quotas for setting a number of women in the military. While we will continue to accept women in the military for support roles, we do not feel it is necessary to push them to join in order to meet a set number of women in the military. With that said, Western cultures differ greatly from India's more conservative views, and we feel that other nations must be mindful of different countries' social norms before trying to implement a quota on nations whose cultures they know nothing about. India's percentage of women in the military is low because of social stigmas, and to implement a quota would be to demand our women to join the military. India yields the remainder of the time to the chair.
Thank you, India. Are there any other delegations that wish to speak at this time? Argentina, you've been recognized.
Thank you, Honorable Chair, fellow delegates. Argentina believes that gender equality is critical to further establish a strong foundation for the betterment of the country. One of the UN Sustainable Development Goals is to end discrimination against all women and girls everywhere. Unfortunately, the military is the final frontier in which women still face inequality. This is why we call for a goal percentage for women in for the number of women in the military. It is important for all countries to allow more women to come out from the shadows and serve in all aspects of the military. As one of the leading progressive countries in Latin America, Argentina stands with the countless women around the globe who wish to serve and protect the country they love, but because they fear cultural backlash or discrimination, they do not. This is a problem that must be addressed now and not later. Argentina yields the remainder of the time to the chair.
Thank you, Argentina. Are there any other delegations that wish to speak at this time? Ghana, you've been recognized.
Thank you, Honorable Chair and fellow delegates. Ghana is able to proudly announce that as of 2014, over 10% of our women make up our military, and they are involved in all aspects, including but not limited to technical, operational, combative, as well as peacekeeping roles. We have been able to achieve this goal even through facing social barriers and gender prejudice by adhering and pursuing the 5th Sustainable Developmental Goal, number 5.c. Adopt and strengthen sound policies and enforceable legislation for the promotion of gender equality and the empowerment of all women and girls at all levels. By 2024, Ghana would like to have achieved the goal percentage of 15% of women in the military and continue to expand and promote for all leadership in all aspects of the military. All countries in the UN should strive to open opportunities for women in the military because our future generations will be better for it, and women all around will look to us for hope that their future will be bright and will have the opportunity to serve their country with honor and pride. Ghana yields the rest of the time to the chair.
Thank you, Ghana. Are there any other delegations that wish to speak at this time? Afghanistan, you've been recognized.
Thank you, Honorable Chair and members of the General Assembly. Since the control of the Taliban nearly 40 years ago, it is likely they will rise again to regain control of Afghanistan. Women especially, who many of them face years of domestic violence. As for a small group of women in our military, making a difference, helping those who are suffering in tears, may be completely banned from the Afghan army. The possibility of facing death and breaking Islamic traditions. Discriminating for even more for the choices they make. Therefore, the people of Afghanistan will not provide outside a quota number of women in the military or in any field. And so a change is made where women can live life in peace. It is impossible at this time to accomplish something by a certain time with a long history of violence. There is still a lot of work to be done. Yes, the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan believes they will be given an opportunity to serve in the armed forces to fight for other women. Nothing can be done under the control of the Taliban. The future of our country is always changing, and with the help of our allies in the UN, Afghanistan can join nations to help policies to help rebuild our country. The people of Afghanistan will one day relive the glory days when both freedoms.
The delegation's time has expired.
Oh, thank you.
All right. At this time, the time for the moderated caucus has expired. We will now come back to the speakers list. Turkey, you now have the floor for 1 minute and 30 seconds.
Thank you, Honorable Chair and fellow delegates. The Republic of Turkey believes that we should be allowed to set quotas based on our own capability of expanding the amount of women in our military. If Turkey has the need and capability to expand, then we will, but Turkey will not be beholden to the quotas of other countries. Turkey yields the remainder of our time to the chair.
Thank you, Turkey. Ukraine, you are next up on the speakers list. You now have the floor for 1 minute and 30 seconds.
Thank you, Honorable Chair and fellow delegates. The country of Ukraine would like to make clear to the Assembly that there was no mention of a quota. The country of Ukraine believes that setting a goal percentage for women in the military is better than setting a quota. A reasonable percentage can be set so that even single-digit percent countries will be able to reach it. If actual progress is made, then a long-term goal can be set. For double-digit percent countries, the goal percentage will be higher due to them having better capabilities to reach it. Ukraine yields the rest of the time to the chair.
Thank you, Ukraine. United States, you are next up on the speakers list. You now have the floor.
Thank you, Honorable Chair and fellow delegates. The United States believes that women should have a part in the military, as it shows in our female enrollment numbers. The United States also believes women should have a combat role as they provide additional assets. Although we believe that women should have equal opportunities in the military, the United States, however, does not believe or expect other countries to adjust to our percentages for different reasons, and agrees with Saudi Arabia that every nation is different and has every right to express their sovereignty. The United States yields the remainder of its time to the chair.
Thank you, United States. All delegations have spoken. At this time, the chair will entertain a motion to close the speakers list.
Germany motions to close the speakers list.
Thank you, Germany. Is there a second on the motion? Argentina seconds. The motion has been seconded and is on the table. Are there any other motions on the floor? Seeing as there are no other motions on the floor, we will now proceed to a vote to close the speakers list. All those in favor, please raise your placards. By unanimous consent, the speakers list is now closed. The co-chair will now present working paper number 1.
General Assembly sponsors Sweden. Signatories Ghana, Ukraine, Germany, Argentina. Percentage of women in the military. The General Assembly, reminding all nations that one of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals is to end all forms of discrimination against women and girls everywhere. Acknowledging the problem of low percentage numbers of women in the military within individual countries. Realizing that change will not occur unless a push is given to countries to increase the percentage of women in the military. Supporting the increase of women in the military, not only in combat roles, but in other fields as well. Bearing in mind that some countries will need more time to progress and can be negotiated for more time. Number 1, demands for there to be a minimum percentage of women to be in the military, affording sovereign nations the option to remain at said percentage or increase after it is reached, after minimum is reached. Number 2, rejects the idea of a long-term deadline leading to no progress made in the first years and subsequent years to come. Number 3, fully supports countries with single-digit percentages of women in the armed forces to make progress in the allotted time. Number 4, takes notes with appreciation of the compliance of each nation to slowly but surely shift toward being more open to raising female participation and upward mobility within the military. Number 5, emphasizes that there is no cap to this proposition, only a minimum which does not force countries to go for unreasonable goals. Thank you.
At this time, the chair will entertain any motions on the floor. Saudi Arabia, you've been recognized.
Saudi Arabia motions to strike operative clauses 1 and 2 from working paper number 1.
Thank you, Saudi Arabia. Is there a second on the motion? Turkey seconds the motion. The motion has been seconded and is on the table. Are there any other motions on the floor? Seeing as there are no other motions on the floor, we will now proceed to a vote. The co-chair will now read the motion.
The motions are as follows. The motion is to strike operative clause 1 and 2 from working paper number 1.
All those in favor, please raise your placards. Against? Abstentions? The vote is 5 in favor and 5 against with 0 abstentions. The motion does not pass. Are there any other motions on the floor? Ghana, you've been recognized.
Ghana would like to motion to have working paper number 2 presented.
The motion is to have working paper number 2 presented. Is there a second on the motion? Ukraine seconds. The motion has been seconded and is on the table. Are there any other motions on the floor? Seeing as there are no other motions on the floor, we will now proceed to a vote. All those in favor, please raise your placard. All those against? Abstentions? The vote is 8 in favor, with 2 against, and 0 abstentions. The motion passes. The co-chair will now present working paper number 2.
Working paper number 2, General Assembly's Third Committee. Sponsors, the United States. Signatories, Islamic Republic of Afghanistan, Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, Republic of India, and the Republic of Turkey. Gender equality and female service in the armed forces. The General Assembly, reminding all nations of the recent International Women's Day, March 8th, which focuses on women's rights for equality in all sectors, to include military service around the globe. Recalling its previous resolution, including Resolution 63-155 and 63-159 of 18th of December 2008, with the intensification of efforts to eliminate all forms of violence against women, Resolution 6-210 of the 22nd of December 2005, to provide integration for women in developing states. Viewing with appreciation Security Council Resolution 1325 on the 31st of October in 2000, which reaffirms the important role of women in the prevention and resolution of conflicts. Noting further the importance of women having equal participation and full involvement in all efforts for the maintenance and the promotion of peace and security. Convinced that women involvement in peacekeeping and armed conflicts have a positive effect on gender-based violence and lower occurrences of rape and sexual abuse. Having considered past UN and non-governmental organizational efforts in introducing equal opportunity and fair treatment for women around the globe, especially for those that serve in their respective armed services. Fully aware of furthering needed progress for gender equality, introducing educational programs to combat violence and discrimination against women, and implementing equal opportunities in military roles. Stressing the importance of the United Nations and fellow members into continuing humanitarian efforts, particularly in women's rights as definitive human right concern. Number 1, encourages all relevant member states of the United Nations in assistance and collaboration with countries in the conduction of training, education, and exercises to further international relations in order to emphasize the importance of creating a favorable domestic and international environment in all fields of life for the effective integration of women in development. Number 2, acknowledges gender inequality, particularly in the military, whereby traditionally dominated by men, and calls upon all governments and agencies to address gender wage gaps and gender segmentation of the military and to improve the conditions of security of women in all roles in the organization. Number 3, urges member states with selective and limited roles for female service members in implementing long-term plans for expansion and reaching certain goals between incremental development. Number 4, also requests multilateral and international military exercises, particularly for women, to further foreign relations and cooperation. Number 5, taking note that the rule of law, human rights, and good governance form the foundation for the achievement of a stable and prosperous state. Number 6, draws attention to previous commitments by Secretariat S 2004-814 to increase gender perspectives in conflict resolution and use Convention on the elimination of all forms of discrimination against women as a structure for post-conflict resolution. Number 7, proclaims the importance of the involvement of women in armed conflict and peacekeeping measures and invites member states to implement into their national military and police forces the integration of women into service with proposal of a 50-year plan along with incremental milestones with regards to sovereign capabilities.
At this time, the chair will entertain a motion to open a moderated discussion on the working paper number 2 for 5 minutes with 1 minute speaking limits. Sweden, you've been recognized.
Sweden motions for a moderated caucus of 5 minutes with 1 minute speaking times on working paper number 2.
Thank you, Sweden. Is there a second on the motion?
Germany seconds the motion.
Thank you, Germany. The motion has been seconded and is on the table. Are there any other motions on the floor? Seeing as there are no other motions on the floor, we will now proceed to a vote. The co-chair will now read the motions on the table.
The motions on the table are as follows. Number 1, a moderated caucus of 5 minutes with 1 minute speaking time limits on working paper number 2.
All those in favor, please raise your placard. Against? Abstentions? The vote is 6 in favor and 2 against with 2 abstentions. The motion passes. We are now in a moderated caucus on working paper number 2. Sweden, since the motion was yours, you have the floor for 1 minute.
Thank you, Honorable Chair and fellow delegates. The Kingdom of Sweden, adhering to a policy of neutrality and agreeing with the pending chaos of forcing social experiment change to the armed forces within current unstable sovereign states, acknowledge the efforts of Voting Bloc 2 and wish to aid them in their journey towards a more inclusive gender norm within their respective nations. Sweden believes it is the right move to keep the pressure on, but also work on the pace set by the signatories of Working Paper 2 in order to get the most progress on the issue at hand. Much like a proper stretch before exercises, Sweden would like to continue pressing safety on the boundary, but not let up to a desired outcome. Sweden yields the rest of the time to the chair.
Thank you, Sweden. Are there any other delegations that wish to speak at this time? India, you've been recognized.
Thank you, Honorable Chair and fellow delegates. The Republic of India acknowledges the gender inequality in the armed force, and this is a field traditionally dominated by men. We understand the need to improve a better condition and the creation of a safe environment for women. We are compromised to increase our numbers, but we need to do this at our own pace. We need to be aware of all the countries and culture and the capabilities that we have. As working paper number 2 on clause number 7, we are doing incremental milestones with regards on sovereign capabilities. This is important for all countries to be open, and we share the importance to be to include women on the armed force, and we look forward to improve all the conditions. We yield the rest of the time.
Thank you, India. Are there any other delegations that wish to speak at this time? Saudi Arabia, you've been recognized.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. We, the delegates of Saudi Arabia, have gone with working paper number 2 because we feel like it is a resolution that will fit well with all delegations. We all agree that women should join and have the right to join the military, and our both working paper state the importance of that. The only difference is that the second working paper is open to long-term plans, which is needed for conservative countries like ours. We feel as the first working paper would discriminate against Islamic countries because we would not be able to reach the high quota that was set on us. We yield the remainder of the time to the chair.
Thank you, Saudi Arabia. Are there any other delegations that wish to speak? Afghanistan, you've been recognized.
Thank you, Honorable Chair and fellow delegates. Afghanistan would like to recognize the Republic of India in recent efforts and military exercises, particularly the training of female Afghan officers at the Chennai Military Academy. The Afghan delegation appreciates multilateral resolutions taking place on this day and looks forward to further efforts of gender equality in the future. Although it is not without its voiced opposition, the delegation of Afghanistan hopes to continue participating with foreign relations, diplomatic efforts, and working alongside the international community and the United Nations in all aspects necessary to further the progress of all sustainable development goals. Admittedly, Afghanistan still has a generous amount of work to be done, particularly for the pursuit of gender equality and equal opportunity in the public, private, and military facets of life. However, it is with great aspiration to integrate women, not just in civilian life, but in all roles of the armed forces, and to heighten the recruitment rates among the National Army, however arduous or interminable these efforts may be. Thank you. Afghanistan yields the remainder of its time to the chair.
Thank you, Afghanistan. Are there any other delegations that wish to speak at this time? Ghana, you've been recognized.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. Upon reviewing Working Paper Number 2, Ghana is glad to see that both working papers ally themselves with the same values in terms of women being represented and respected all throughout in all measures on the social stage. But what we cannot stand for is a 50-year plan. Change happens rapidly, and it is inevitable. It is better to be the catalyst than the result. As William Pollard said, without change, there is no innovation, creativity, or incentive for improvement. Those who initiate change will have a better opportunity to manage the change that is inevitable. Ghana urges all delegates to set goal percentages that promote women involvement in the military now. It is not the UN's job to govern or enforce others, but to encourage and promote nations to come together for a plan for the future. These warriors are the future of tomorrow. Strengthen existing policies that will encourage women to join and fight for their country with dignity. Ghana yields the rest of the time to the chair.
Thank you, Ghana. The time for the moderated caucus has expired. At this time, the chair will entertain any motions on the floor. Sweden, you've been recognized.
Sweden motions to strike down operative clause 5 on working paper number 2.
The motion is to strike down operative clause 5 on working paper number 2. Is there a second on the motion? Argentina seconds. The motion has been seconded and is on the table. We will now proceed to a vote to strike operative clause 5. All those in favor, please raise your placards. Against? Abstentions? The vote is 5-4 in favor, 2 against, with 4 abstentions. The motion passes. Operative clause 5 has been struck. At this time, the chair will entertain a motion to vote on working paper number 1. United States, you've been recognized.
United States motions to vote on working paper 1.
Thank you, United States. Is there a second on the motion? Argentina seconds. The motion is on the table. Are there any other motions on the floor? Seeing as there are no other motions on the floor, we will now proceed to a vote. The co-chair will now read the motion.
The motions on the table are as follows. The motion is to vote on working paper number 1.
All right. All those in favor, please raise your placards. Against? Abstentions? The vote is 3 in favor, 4 against, with 3 abstentions. Working paper 1 does not pass as resolution 1. At this time, the chair will entertain a motion to vote on working paper number 2.
Germany motions to vote on working paper number 2.
The motion is to vote on working paper number 2. Is there a second on the motion? Ukraine seconds. The motion is on the table. Are there any other motions on the floor? Seeing as there are none, we will now proceed to a vote. The co-chair will now read the motion on the table.
The motions on the table are as follows. The motion is to vote on working paper number 2.
All those in favor, please raise your placards. Against? Abstentions? The vote is 6 in favor, with 3 against, and 1 abstention. Working paper number 2 passes as resolution 1. At this time, the chair will entertain a motion to end debate. Afghanistan, you've been recognized.
Afghanistan motions to end the debate.
The motion is to end debate. Is there a second on the motion? Thank you, India. The motion has been seconded. Are there any other motions on the floor? Seeing as there are none, we will now proceed to a vote. All those in favor, please raise your placards. By unanimous consent, the debate is now closed. Thank you, fellow delegates. We will see you next session.